Hello YouTube, Kimosabe here. We got another video. So this one is off of a webpage, GIZMODO, written by Melissa, on the 9th of April. So, and I think it was maybe even 5 years ago, 2013. So, old page, but interesting. So here we go. Project Mkultra, one of the most shocking CIA programs of all time. When the extent of the U.S. government's domestic spying program was revealed this past summer, many were surprised and outraged. How could a government which so prizes the liberty of its citizens covertly collect data on its own people? Yet sadly, this is not the first time Uncle Sam, without permission or notice, secretly gathered information on its people, and were even close to the greatest atrocity. For that, there are numerous other examples, such as when the government intentionally poisoned certain alcohol supplies they knew people would drink, killing over 10,000 American citizens and sickening many and thousands of others. Despite this, the program continued for some time, though it was hotly debated in Congress when the death tolls started rolling in. One other such interesting program was from 1953 to 1964, when the Central Intelligence Agency CIA conducted dozens of experiments on the effects of biological and chemical agents on American citizens without their knowledge in Project MKUltra. These covert tests included subjecting to unwitting subject to hallucinogenic drugs and other chemicals, among other things. It is difficult to find official documents about this program. However, in 1976 and 1977, the U.S. Senate conducted investigations and even held a joint committee hearing on Project MKUltra, then published much of what was discovered. You will not believe what they found out. MKUltra's purpose. According to the hearing project, the project was intended to develop a capability in the covert use of biological and chemical materials. The motivation was also defensive, in that many were afraid of, during the Cold War, that the Russians and Chinese had already developed weapons in this area. As the project's proponents noted, the development of a comprehensive capability in the field of covert chemical and biological warfare gives us the thorough knowledge of the enemy's theoretical potential, to enable us to defend ourselves against a foe who might not be as restrained in the use of these techniques as we are. Officially authorized in 1953, by 1955, Project CREEP had expanded the CIA's authority under the MKUltra to include the following: discovery of the following materials and methods, including those which will promote the intoxicating effect of alcohol, which will render the induction of hypnosis easier or otherwise enhance its usefulness, which will enhance the ability of individuals to withstand privation, torture, and coercion during interrogation, and so-called brainwashing, which will produce amnesia for events preceding and during their use, which will produce shock and confusion over extended periods of time, and capable of surreptitious use, and which will produce physical disablement such as paralysis of the legs, acute amnesia, etc. LSD experiments. Senator Edward Kennedy dominated the hearing. In his opening remarks, he noted there was an extensive testing and experimentation program which included covert drug tests on unwitting citizens at all social levels, high and low, Native Americans, and foreign. Several of these tests involved the administration of LSD to unwitting subjects in social situations. For many of these drug tests, especially early on, there were no medical personnel on hand either to administer the drugs or to observe their effects. Often the randomly selected subject had become ill for hours or days, including hospitalization in at least one case. Even more troubling, some of the tests proved lethal, but that did not stop the CIA from continuing their experimentation. The deaths of 2 Americans can be attributed to these programs. Other participants in the testing programs may still suffer from the residual effects. The fact that they were continued for years after the danger of supposititious administration of LSD to unwitting individuals was known demonstrate fundamental disregard for the value of human life. One of these lies belonged to Dr. Frank Olson himself, a researcher with the U.S. Army who studied developing techniques for extensive use of biological weapons and biological research for the CIA. Along with a group of 9 other such scientists, he attended a conference in a cabin at Deep Creek Lake, Maryland in November 1953. Once there, ironically, CIA operatives spiked the researchers' cornetto with LSD. Only after the scientists had finished their drinks, they informed that they had been drugged. Most of the researchers handled the experience well and no after effects, but not Dr. Olson. He never recovered from the ordeal, and shortly after the experiment began to show symptoms of paranoia and schizophrenia. Dr. Olson's superior and the CIA who ran the experiment arranged for him to get treatment in New York City while spending the night in a hotel room with the CIA officer, and after requesting a wake-up call for the next morning, Dr. Olson somehow managed to fall to his death. As the CIA officer Lashbrook reported, at approximately 2:30 a.m. in the morning, Saturday, November 28th, Lashbrook was awakened by a loud crash of glass. Olson had crashed through the closet window blind and the closed window, and he fell to his death from the window of our room to the 10th floor. There is no indication that any investigation of foul play, particularly by the CIA officer, who was both responsible for the experiment and alone in the hotel room with Olson, was ever conducted. Universities, prisons, and hospitals conducted experiments. In the hearings, Senator Kennedy noted that many otherwise respectable institutions were fraudulently incorporated into the MKUltra projects. What we are basically talking about is the preservation and corruption of many of our outstanding research centers in this country with CIA funds, where some of our top researchers were unwittingly involved in research sponsored by the agency in which they had no knowledge of the background or their support. According to the hearing report, 86 university or institutions were involved, and 185 non-government researchers and assistants worked on these projects. Physicians, toxicologists, and other specialists in mental and narcotics were lured into MKUltra through the provision of grants that were made under Sustainable Research Foundation SPECIS, thereby concealing the CIA's interest for the specialist institution. For some of the 12 hospitals that participated in Project MKUltra, tests were conducted on terminal cancer patients, and presumably because the experiments were anticipated to have long-lasting detrimental, if not lethal, effects. Sadly, to get the hospitals and perhaps the patients to agree to these experiments, the CIA often paid the institution. For example, Sub-Project 23, authorized in August 1955, worked as follows. The project engineer authorized the contractor to pay the hospital's expenses of certain persons suffering from incurable cancer for the privilege of studying the effects of these chemicals during their terminal illness. Likewise, many of the experiments conducted at the 3 prisons were done secretly. We also know how that some unwitting testing took place on criminal sexual psychopaths. Not all testing was done unwittingly, although that did not make it any more ethical. For example, in a prison experiment conducted by the National Institute of Mental Health Addiction Research Center at the Lexington Rehabilitation Center, a prison for convicted drug addicts, prisoners who volunteered to participate in a hallucinogenic drug experiment were promised and received doses of the drug of their addiction. Miscellaneous other experiments, an unknown number of other experiments in such areas as effects of electroshocks, harassment techniques for extensive use, and gas-propelled sprays and aerosols to be used as assassination delivery systems were also being conducted. In addition, MKUltra scientists were authorized to research additional avenues to control of human behavior, including radiation and paramilitary devices and materials. Heinous covert experiments by the numbers. MKUltra consists of 149 sub-projects, many of which appear to have some connection with research into the behavior modification, drug acquisition, and testing or administering drugs surreptitiously, including as follows. 6 sub-projects involving tests on unwitting subjects were conducted. 8 sub-projects involving hypnosis, including 2 that used drugs, were performed. 7 sub-projects included the use of drugs or chemicals. 4 sub-projects used magician's art, superstitious delivery of drug-related materials. 9 sub-projects studied sleep research, read deprivation, and psychotherapy influence on behavior. And 6 sub-projects studies the effects on human tissue of exotic pathogens and the capability to incorporate them into effective delivery systems, etc. The CIA lost or destroyed all records of Project MKUltra. Sadly, but not surprisingly, almost no records remained of the 10 years of the covert activity, as Senator Kennedy noted. Perhaps most disturbing of all was the fact that the extent of the experimentation in human subjects was unknown. The records of all these activities were destroyed in 1973 at the instruction of the then CIA Director Richard Helms. Notably, however, some records were overlooked during the CIA's destruction. because new records were found in 1972, as noted by Senator Kennedy. We believe that the record, incomplete as it was as complete as it was going to be. Then one individual, through a Freedom of Information request, accomplished that 2 U.S. Senate committees could not. He spurred the agency into finding additional records. The records revealed a far more extensive series of experiments than had previously thought. Nonetheless, these records still leave an incomplete record of the program. No accountability. 2 lawsuits arising out of MKUltra's activities made it to the Supreme Court, but both protected the government over citizens' rights. In 1985, the court held in CIA vs. Sims that the names of the institutions and researchers who participated in Project MKUltra were exempt from revelation under the Freedom of Information Act of the CIA's need to protect its intelligence sources. In 1987, the United States vs. Stanley, the court held that a serviceman who had volunteered for a chemical weapons experiment, but who was actually tested with LSD, was barred from bringing a claim under the Federal Tort Claims Act. So there you have it. Have a good day, everyone. See you on the next one.